What I would like to do now, Michael, because you have the experience producing and creating games, walk us through the process of game development from the early idea. And if you could also pepper it with how localization interferes at different stages where localization helps.
Well, like I say, it helps or hinders or becomes, well, because that's the thing. So, and that was one of the things I was going to say before, and I moved away from it. But back then, it was a real case of, oh, do we really have to localize?
Michael, welcome to the podcast.
Lovely to be here. Thank you very much for asking me.
How are you doing?
Here. Yes, wonderful, wonderful. It's so hot and delicious over here at the moment. We're obviously still all in lockdown, but what can you do about that? But I work from home anyway, so it's not the end of the world. It's just kind of when it's lovely and warm, then it's just, it's a bit upsetting whether or not you're in work or you're at home when there's people all frolicking about outside and enjoying the sun, and you're not. But it's also my wedding anniversary today.
Oh, really?
So that's delightful. So what
and
better
you're spending your evening with me.
I can't imagine a nicer thing I could be doing than talking with you now. Having this call, but she's out anyway, so it doesn't really matter. So
wait, is that how you spend your anniversary? You're doing a podcast and she's out hanging out with friends?
She's socially distancing in a park somewhere with some buddies and having a glass or two of wine, and I'm here with you, not drinking wine, just drinking water. So yes, I'm sure she'll come back and she'll be suitably what's the right word? Oh, I probably shouldn't use the word. I'll just say that she'll be refreshed when she comes back, as one would expect.
Michael, can you quickly tell us what you do?
Indeed. I am the business dev director for LocalizeDirect. And so part of that role is kind of going to trade shows, which obviously isn't really happening at the moment. There's lots of kind of this online stuff going on. So primarily going to those types of things, kind of organizing what we want to do at those shows, getting all that kind of signed off and then attending those shows. And then I also do a lot of the PM stuff and a lot of the sort of PM in terms of receiving requests and sending those requests out for translation. And then also looking after LocDirect and support that might come from LocDirect, which is our own internally developed CMS that's being used at lots of places like Warner Brothers and what have you.
You're not only the BD director, you are also the co-founder, right, of the company, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, there were three of us that kind of kicked it all off. We used to actually work together at IDOS. So these guys were IDOS Sweden, and then when there was a purchase, an SCI purchase back in the IDOS days, then I became the producer on the games that they were working on. And so we got to know each other then. We kind of understood that, making games, is complicated enough as it is, but we always found that that working on the localization side of things always just created so much pain. And so, so kind of like when there was some reorganization at IDOS, and so the guys then kind of got together with me, and then we kind of discussed about, kind of making a tool. And we always felt that kind of making a tool would be a really kind of strong thing to have and would really kind of, it would help so many people, because we just wish that we had something that worked in the way that our current system does. But yes, so we were all game devs, understand the pain that people go through when trying to make games, and just how, are there kind of parts of that pipe that we can kind of streamline and make work in a much, much better way. And localization was definitely one of them. And, and we are looking at, other parts of the process that we can try to kind of streamline as well. And that's kind of coming up later on, and we're going to be releasing something new soon.
So just for the folks listening to this or watching, this episode with Michael will be about game localization. So finally I made it, at least a bit, my first step into the game localization by talking to people from the game localization. Because Absolutely. Not sure if you know, guys, but I'm a huge fan of video games. I've been playing since I was young, and I'm still playing. I was playing Darkest Dungeon last night before I went to bed.
Nice.
So yeah. We will be talking about this thing. So I'm wondering, when you were still working at IDOS as a producer, and I think you were working on Commandos, which is one of my favorite series, what were the options for localization back then when you said that it wouldn't do the job as you would like it to do?
Well, I mean, because I worked on Commandos and I worked on Time Splitters and lots of other titles as well. And each time, and unless it was from the same studio, each title would have a different kind of method, a different kind of system that they would use. And it was never kind of apart from in the early days of in the days of the Pyro Studio stuff, so Commandos and Praetorians and things like that. The Pyro guys, they actually created a tool as well that would actually make the process a lot smoother as well, and could actually update in real time as well. So that was a wonderful tool. It wasn't online at all. It was very much, you used to have to send a packet each time that there was an update, but it just made things a lot smoother. But normally it was Excel files, it was text files, it was all kind of really brutal, kind of trying to find word counts, trying to somehow version control each of these kind of Excel files as they would go backwards and forwards. So it was always kind of like a pain all the way through for all those years. And it didn't, and within IDOS, we internally kind of worked on a tool as well. But it's always it's one of those things that even when you work on something internally, you really need to kind of manage it, and you need to make sure you support it and update it regularly. And that was something, unless you have an actual team doing that all the time, things very kind of readily fall away and become kind of, bugs start becoming really prevalent in the system. So it's really important for us to kind of say, right, okay, so we're making this tool, and this tool will be super supported. It's going to be updated all the time. If you're licensing from us, then we will make sure that the clients are always up to date. So it's really important to kind of say, we get that. You don't want to look after that. We will look after it. So you don't have to worry about that at all. So yeah, so working on these games was, it was just always kind of, and back then, so I joined in 98. So this is between 98 and 2008 when I was working at IDOS, that it was just, lots, I mean, I'm not sure what the count was, but, I think it's sort of 16 titles or whatever it was I worked on in that time. They always had the same, is this the last file? Is this the previous version? This changed, but this wasn't updated properly. And, you had so many different kind of moving parts. And then those moving parts might go to different vendors for the translations, and, the Russian might come from there, etc. So, there were so many things that could potentially go wrong and regularly did go wrong. So this was a real kind of sticking point for us. But, in terms of languages, I mean, that's a very interesting thing as well, that we've seen kind of the number of languages and the language choices have grown so much since back then. So what we used to, I mean, it was figs. And so figs, and that was kind of it. And then the export sales guys might sign a deal for Russian maybe, or perhaps Polish. But beyond those guys, it was rare that, you could potentially sometimes go into Japan. But then there was, were Japanese gamers, were they that keen in a lot of the Western developed titles? So there was that kind of thing going on as well. So sometimes we'd have a Japanese version. Quite regularly, a version would happen across our desks that might be a Japanese version of Commandos, and it'd be like, well, we had absolutely nothing to do with that. Okay, interesting. It's like, it's a pretty good job though. It's kind of like, okay, yeah, you've done well there. But the same would happen. So it was one of those things was you had to kind of get, you had to kind of understand where the demand was for it, and then if there was that demand, get in there yourself, basically. So rather than just allow a Polish bootlegger to create the Polish version, let's do a Polish version as well, and let's see if that can financially make sense. But yeah, it's changed a lot. So now it's Brazilian, and there's Chinese, and there's so many languages now that are kind of being pushed, especially on PC. You've got to go into Russian. There's a huge Turkish market. And there's all these other countries coming up as well. So that's changed a lot since the old days of Commandos 2 and Commandos 3 and stuff, which I was going to actually wear a Commando shirt, and I thought, no, come on now, this is too old.
But I used to be in high school when I was playing Commandos. No, I used to be in high school when I was playing Commandos. Yeah.
Oh my goodness. I know. So did you find it really difficult? I didn't think it was that difficult.
No. I really liked it. No.
Which level setting did you play it on? Which difficulty?
Wait, there were difficulties? I forgot. Yeah. I didn't know. Because you have unlimited number of saving, right? And loading.
Well, you used to have to save probably 1 million times.
Yeah, that was the genre. Quick save, quick load, quick save, quick load, yes.
You get past one little section of wall, save. Oh my god, I can't believe I've beat that. Wonderful. Or you'd save it at just the wrong moment and you'd be like, no.
Exactly.
Oh,
I'm like, oh
no,
no.
what have I done? What have I done? Oh, God.
So as I understand, back then the situation was that there was no localization manager at IDOS. Every team had to do its own. There was?
No, absolutely no. So at IDOS, there was you had the kind of localization kind of overlord. She knows who she is. Hi. So absolutely wonderful person. So she would be looking after all the different localizations and dealing with the localization vendors, and that would all be going through that one person. But then she might then have some people, kind of some PMs working underneath her as well. And so those people would actually be the ones that would speak to the producers and then understand what was coming from the localization package, make sure that there's any potential risks are being kind of mitigated and being discussed. Does the development team understand that there needs to be a certain amount of space, because when it comes to localizing from English to German or Spanish or whatever, it's going to be a lot longer. So, making sure that the dev team are kind of have borne that in mind, making sure that there's gender flags and there's all kinds of things to ensure that, things are being translated properly. So there was definitely. I mean, IDOS was a reasonably big company, so you definitely needed to have people in those roles. So as a producer, it'd be very much a case of I would just be making sure that we got all of those ducks in a row and made sure that we kind of had those questions answered, that we had a pack ready to go, and we were answering questions before, rather than being surprised by things later on and going, this has broken the game, or these the way we're showing placeholders is really, really poor, or this number creation is really, really bad for Polish or Russian that have number requirements in their text. So there's kind of answering all of these things before rather than after. But yeah, the localization manager would be the person that would say, this is not going to work, this is not going to work. And hopefully the idea would be that the producer would be able to have these questions, or and already kind of be asking these things beforehand, so they're kind of learning on the job as well. So I find that today that there's so many studios kind of are being formed all the time, and there's people that they are kind of doing a localization for the first time, and you kind of go, these are the same things that I experienced kind of 20 years ago, and it's kind of like, these things still happen. It's kind of, why is this still happening? So maybe there does need to be, I think, maybe some, so like we learnt on the job back then is, having that kind of those kind of tutorials that tell people, okay, so these are the things that you've got to not do to make sure, unless you want to have trouble at the very end, then don't do these things, because then it'll make everything work a lot in a much better way. So so some tutorials or something, I don't know, some kind of, if it's, obviously you can go to university or college or whatever, and you can learn, there are courses for this, but they're very much kind of development based rather than kind of process points within the process itself. So I don't believe that there is a kind of an actual localization part of a development program. So so the ability to actually kind of say, right, so these are the kind of usual problems. How are you making sure that when you do eventually come to your full development, look after these things in advance? So it would be great to have those things happen, because at the moment it is just the same stuff over and over again. It's like, wow, we don't seem to have kind of moved along in terms of kind of knowledge base for the people who are starting to, who are making their first games. So even, when I go to these shows, I like to meet with kind of current clients, kind of new clients. But I also like to spend some time with students, who want to speak to me or want to kind of get some kind of some feedback. And regularly, I'm going through code and kind of going, wow, you've left zero space for any other language to possibly fit in there, but just purely your 3-letter English abbreviation you've used there. And it's like, whoa, okay, and so is that scalable? What's going to happen here? And it's like, we haven't even thought about it. It's like, oh shit, okay, this is going to be interesting. So so it's kind of, it's one of the things I like to do as well, because again, it's, people making the same kind of errors over and over again can be mitigated, and it should be.
Do you know the term internationalization?
Yes. What about it?
Well, what you just described to me, we call it as internationalization when it comes to software localization. It's really about educating the developers how they should create a software, so then it's easier to localize it.
Sure.
I'm not sure if it's just a term that's not used for game development.
No, it absolutely is. Absolutely. But I'm just saying, yes, but mine is the kind of, it's, are there internationalization courses that are currently available, but are they developable within the game development environment? I don't know. I mean, the kind of the conversations I have, I kind of, it leads me to believe that maybe those things don't exist because we encounter it so often. And I think that, if it was something that was kind of in hand, then we wouldn't kind of keep finding these things all the time. Well, people are still actually putting text they're kind of like baking text into code itself. So they've got to somehow kind of go in there and pass all of that text out so it can then be localized without leaving stuff behind and creating all these kind of various problems. And people are still doing that today. I mean, fair enough. If you've got things like Unity and Unreal, they'll work in a kind of different way and allow you to do that. But if you're creating your own kind of engine, or you've created a kind of a part, kind of a plugin or whatever for an engine, then that's, if you're not looking after that to start off with, when you try to then localize it, it's going to be horrible, absolutely horrible. So yeah, so I think it's just that kind of sharing of knowledge is super important.
Have you mapped or surveyed the people who come to you with these problems? Are they like their first-time developers, and maybe they don't even think about like eventually I would like to localize my game? They just want to create something and they just start and just go. And then suddenly they're like, hey, by the way, maybe we should have this in Russian.
All of a sudden they've made something and people start going, hey, this is pretty good, you should, I think they'd like this in Japan. And they're like, okay, that sounds great.
What do I do?
How should I do that now? Totally. Well, there's a real mix. I mean, the thing is, the problems that people encounter that can come from, big companies even, so it might just be kind of a fairly kind of newish associate producer or something that's working in a big company, and they've not really had that exposure before. But yeah, we have a lot of kind of 2-3 person dev teams and 1 person dev teams, and so you've got that one person who kind of might still be at university and might still be kind of doing their course, and they're just kind of going, well, people seem to like this game, I'm here to talk to publishers, and you kind of go, oh, that's great. Well, let me have a look at it, because if you sign with a publisher, then the likelihood is your publisher will pay for all the localization side of things, depending on what the deal is that they work out. But let me have a look at it to kind of give you an idea of what that kind of cost might be to you or to the publisher, depending on how you go. And I'll have a look through and I'll kind of give a bit of feedback on kind of these are the things to look out for. So regularly, they are, guys that have, this is their first thing and they're still in Lund University or whatever. And they're kind of saying, okay, so people say this is cool. What do I do next? And it's like, okay, let's go over here and sit down.
Let's take a step back.
Yeah. No, but we get there, and it's kind of like, and it's really great. You get some really kind of, this, when you get things like, oh, I had no idea about that, or oh, this is completely the first time I've ever heard of this, and you kind of go, brilliant. So if nothing else happens today, then this person's kind of view, this kind of person's kind of life potentially has changed from this one kind of small conversation that we've had, because they had no idea, which is a bit crazy as well, but just they had no idea how big Steam was in Russia. And it's kind of like, okay, so this was like, oh, I had no idea it was actually so massive. And it's like, yes, you must. If you have a Steam game, if you have a PC game, you must go into Russia. But then if you do that, then obviously you need to be careful about how you then handle all of that localization, which is then the next part of the conversation, which is kind of like, don't have numbers, within a sentence, because numbers themselves have to be treated in a very different way to other elements.
Mm-hmm.
But that's for another podcast.
Probably, yeah. I'm still curious, do you guys have any, let's say, concentrated effort and initiative to educate young developers when it comes to localization?
Well, we try. We always kind of when there's a talk, when there's a show, and what we find is that a lot of shows that we go to, there are plenty of your big companies, your Bandais and, whatever it might be, Rebellions. And so there's all these kind of big guys, but then there's tons and tons of very, very small guys and students. There's always loads and loads and loads. So what we always try to do, we always try to kind of offer to do a talk on localization and what those pitfalls are. And it's great. When we do those talks, you see kind of heads around the room like nodding or kind of going, "Oh, I had no idea." And so that's really really rewarding when you see that kind of thing going on. But yeah, so that's the thing. So we don't actually have a what's funny?
For some reason, I just imagine like a bunch of people, as in the Sims game, and just when you talk about localization, they kind of like, it goes like
bubble appears, yeah,
and then like leveled up,
smiley face, yeah, yeah, level up.
Sorry, go on.
No, it's fine. And then I plaster over the door so they can't escape, and then they get very upset.
I used to throw them into a pool, and then you take out the ladder so they cannot go out and they drown.
It's that's
beautiful,
just
right?
Yeah. I am God today. Yeah. Awful. I won't even talk about this kind of things that we did. I mean, yeah, you were just so awful when that game first came out. You were like, right, what is the worst stuff I can do to this poor person? And yeah, removing the ladder from their pool is kind of like, they're just swimming around. But yeah, so that's the thing. If you have a room and you remove the door from the room, then obviously no good can come from that. And then you watch this kind of deterioration happen over the period. Yeah, there's lots of very unhappy, sad faces and crying. But anyway, we should carry on. So yeah, so it's not like The Sims.
That was pre-COVID, right? you knew all the way. Yeah. Stuck at home.
What can happen? Where's my door gone? My door's gone. So yeah, so going to these shows and doing these talks, that's what we do. So we don't have any kind of official kind of seminar or anything like that, or kind of tutorial ourselves that we've created, and maybe that's something we could potentially do. But we just think that especially going to these shows when we are accepted, because this thing, localization within games until fairly recently, where people have you immediately see this direct relation to increase in sales to localizing. Until we've been able to in recent times have that very kind of clear bomb. That's what's happened here. That's when we potentially released it and it didn't have that language, and now it's got the language. Bang, and you see that increase. Back in the day, you'd have to really kind of fight to kind of make localization make sense, because back then a lot of people maybe were more accepting of having your game in English, and they would just kind of try to play as much as they could because that's just what everyone did. But the more and more people supported other languages, then the more obviously the expectation becomes the rule. So you people want to play in French, people want to play in German. If you tried to release a box product and it wasn't in French, then French people just wouldn't want to pick it up, unless it was like a GoldenEye or something. But even a GoldenEye would struggle.
Do you think it's because games became more mainstream and more casual?
No, I think it's more to do with formats. I think still, if you had Commandos, for example, and you didn't localize it, there's so much text in there, but the text is very much kind of narrative, because when you look at the levels themselves, it was very kind of clear. Okay, so you've got these 3 team members. And so with those 3 team members, one's going to blow stuff up, one's going to swim, blah, 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 blah. Right? So you knew, okay, so he's going to have this kind of set of tools, and I'm going to have to get from here and kill a number of Nazis to get to the other side of the map.
Beep.
And yeah. I know, it's all good now. That's all good. So, so you would have to do that. So I think language there wasn't the be-all and end-all, because it wasn't driving this kind of Zelda-type narrative that, you really had to kind of get involved in, or Last of Us or whatever. So I think it's more a case of, casual games fine. You might have a match 3 game, and in which case, how important is localization? It might be more important because of the fact that there are so many different types of people playing it. I mean, I had friends that actually I've got a number of friends that used to buy Japanese games totally in Japanese, and play it, and just really kind of work out what was happening, and that's how they used to just love playing games. And so yeah, those were like the super hardcore. But I think that a lot of these games, their simplicity. I think it's more a case of it's platform, it's kind of requirement. There's a lot of children's games out there that there never were before, or games that would be kind of played by children. Back in the day, it never really happened. So now you have to ensure that the children aren't going to be fluent in English at 8 years old. So that stuff needs to be localized. So I think, certainly, I think back in the day, maybe it could be a case of there were lots of games that weren't so kind of hardcore, but I think that platforms and the kind of the availability of gaming to people has driven that localization. I think that more and more people kind of want to play games and want to kind of understand those games. And I think that there's a report where it's something like 45% of people will not buy a game unless the metadata itself is understandable. And so if you've got high language proficiency, then it's maybe not the end of the world. But if you're trying to release it into a low proficiency territory, and it's not, and your metadata itself, so you might have a match 3 game, but if the text itself, their metadata doesn't explain what kind of game it is, and you can usually discern a match 3 from the screenshots. But if they can't even read it. So if I see something that appears in an alphabet that I don't understand, I will regularly just go next. I'll just move on to the next one, until I have the language that I'm expecting to see. So you imagine there must be so many people losing money as a result of not just translating or localizing the meta text. So that's a real shame. And this is a kind of an educational thing as well, like we were saying before, that people just think, oh well, everyone speaks English. It's like, no, people really don't. A lot of people speak English, but a lot of people don't speak English, and especially kids, etc. So you need to be able to kind of reach those people in some way.
At the same time, my experience when I was growing up, the games were an opportunity and a great way to learn English. Because I'm from Slovakia, so if you're playing games like Baldur's Gate, where there's a lot of text, the narrative, the story is there, then you just pick up a dictionary and just go over it. Like otherwise, without understanding the story, you're not going to get much value.
I'd imagine that not many games came out in your language.
Yes.
I would have thought.
Back then, like you said, it's about the accessibility. Back then, there was no Steam. It wasn't as easy as just downloading things.
Sure.
And if you wanted to buy a regular game, we didn't have money for that.
Yeah, and it'd probably be super expensive.
Yes. So,
yeah. I know, that's the thing. I mean, I remember kind of, things have, the consoles, etc., become so much more affordable than they were back then. I remember, I started out on a Spectrum all those years ago, and that was just horrifically expensive. And you had to save, for a long time to be able to get this. And then when you actually play it, you think it's basically this magic. It's simply magic, and it was the price point was of that magic level. So it's kind of this is wonderful stuff. So, but now people can play on their phones, and it's kind of it's these things are multi-use as well. So you're not just buying a thing that you can play a few games on and maybe learning a bit of basic on. So it's kind of now it's kind of you can do so much stuff, the kind of the penetration of mobile phones is just amazing. And I remember having this conversation with people at IDOS years ago when mobile games were kind of just starting to kind of do, and it wasn't just playing Snake or or something like super base, even though now Snake is one of the most popular games. But don't worry about that.
Really?
But like Snake IO and all that kind of stuff is absolutely massive. And it's basically the concept hasn't changed in 25 years. But anyway, so I remember having this discussion and really thinking, is this really going to work? Is this really the future? And you look back on those conversations and you go, wow, that was short-sighted. But I remember a couple of people within the office just going, no, this is money right here, and we would just go, yeah, I'm just not sure. Not sure. And we go back, we have these conversations after all these years going, wow, that was on the money right there. But so there you have it.
What I would like to do now, Michael, because you have the experience producing and creating games, and now you're on the localization side. So what I would like to do with you is if you could somehow briefly, I'm not sure if you can do it briefly, walk us through the process of game development from the early idea, and if you could also pepper it with how localization interferes at different stages. Because so far we only mentioned that somebody sends an Excel sheet with the strings for translation, but I hope that that's not the only case where localization helps.
Well, like I say, it helps or hinders or becomes, well, because that's the thing. So, and that was one of the things I was going to say before, and I moved away from it. But back then, it was a real case of, oh, do we really have to localize? It was always met with huge amounts of reluctance. It's like, oh, and if somebody then said, oh, you know what, yeah, actually, we're not going to do the Italian because the numbers are low or whatever, you'd go, oh, brilliant, we don't have to do Italian. And it's kind of like, it's kind of, because it was just like, oh, this was just adding time. Every single version then had to be QA'd. It all had to kind of go through this kind of really kind of hard process. And then so you didn't want to do it back then. And now I think that more and more people kind of go, yes, we should do this. I must point out that I regularly found that the Americans were very against it. They were like, put it out in English, it'll be fine.
Everybody understands English, right?
yeah, exactly. Everyone understands English. No, they don't. So that was the thing. So going through the process itself and how localization kind of meets certain points, I think that, when you're developing, obviously that you start off maybe with a design document, maybe like a short document kind of just outlining kind of like a few pages of the kind of game it's going to be. Can you kind of elevator pitch it to say that it's Grand Theft Auto in space or whatever it might be, or it's Wild West Commandos or whatever it is. So the idea is that you've got like a very kind of brief kind of overview, what makes it special, what's going to be really cool about it, then a kind of a kind of an outline of how long you kind of initially think it's going to take to make it, what's the kind of budget involved, and so real kind of like top super level stuff. Then from that point, if you get like traction,
do you at that stage as a producer already think about having the game localized, or like in which markets it would make sense to sell it in?
Well, back then, I mean, I've been out of the game for 10 years now. Maybe that's now a consideration in this time.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, certainly, I think that because of the way games have become far more kind of global than they used to be. It was very much a case of you used to make a game and kind of go, okay, will this work in other territories? And then you'd kind of go from that point. But maybe the conversations now are more along the lines of, okay, so we're making this game. Now we could maybe that would be slightly too early potentially. Maybe it would be at the next kind of the next stage.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe there's the need to kind of say, well, actually, we can ensure, but the way that we make this game is that we can then reskin it in a number of different ways that will then make it super attractive to coincide with other kind of national holidays or whatever it might be in different countries. So maybe then that makes it even more interesting that if you can say, okay, so we're going to make this in a very kind of easily reskinnable way. And that's what I'm saying, that maybe that's more of a concern or maybe more of a consideration now where you are easily kind of pushing updates and versions to phones, whereas back then it was on a disc and it's kind of like, right, so now we're going to do a Chinese Singles Day version. It's like, no, you can't do that. It's kind of like, okay, so let's just run that through PlayStation again. So you couldn't really do that then, but you can do that now. So I think that certainly you could probably have those discussions now to kind of say these are the kind of the specific versions we can make for different territories, or how or again, probably it would need a localization person or a seasoned producer to really kind of jump in quite early to say, okay, well, I think there is the potential here. I think this kind of, or because back in the day it would be more a case of I'm going to make a game that's going to be a side scroller shooter with a ship, and little kind of balls will appear around the side and they'll spin round and you'll be able to shoot from them and stuff. And then people go, oh, that's a bit like R-Type. Oh, that'll be good in Japan then. And then you kind of go, oh, okay, then, well, maybe it will be. And then that would be the consideration of, oh, this game could be good in Japan.
Mm-hmm.
It wouldn't be a case of what can we do to the game to make it interesting in Japan, because there would be a lot of cost associated. And then the whole kind of splitting release and, that's just a big headache required, unless the game is going to be massive. So I think that, certainly you can maybe not so early in development, but certainly kind of to the next, when you go to like the GDD, which is the game design document, when you actually have a fully fleshed out, this is what the mission structure is going to be. This is the kind of the story arc behind the game. This is the technical. So you'll then have a TDD as well as the technical design document, which will then break down how it's actually going to be put together. So this is also very much paperwork based, because obviously it's much easier to throw away paper than it is to spend loads of money on actually creating the code. So then once that GDD is kind of signed off in principle and the TDD, then you would then move on to the next step, which is then trying to then show kind of like a proof of life. So proof of concept. So you would then kind of go into, right, okay, let's put some of this together, basic, fairly basic. And then actually then take that to potentially a board meeting or whatever it is to then get those guys to sign off on it. And then, at that stage, there could be some localization discussions at that point there where you're starting to talk about, where could this go? But again, this is stuff from like kind of Commandos times, or, sometimes actually the language list that you're given is one that is regularly kind of pushed, kind of like enforced, as it were. So if you want to be featured on the App Store, for example, you need to have a certain number of localizations. So that's kind of, so these days it's not a case of actually I just want to do it in English and French. It's kind of like, no, you need to do it in English, French, German, blah, blah, blah. So the actual kind of, but when the actual kind of not just concept kind of work is required, then that would certainly follow on later. So if, for example, you've reached your first playable, you might be putting together like a demo for a trade show, which we have done in the past. So it would just be like a super stripped down version, and you might want to then do a version for Gamescom, for example. So in that case, you might then want to have a German version to show the press at Gamescom. And so, because obviously if you can have that there, then that's going to appeal, so long as the localization is good. If it's terrible localization and you're showing it to a German press member, then obviously they're going to think, well, this is crappy. So you might then have some localization requirement at that point as well. But certainly before you get to first playable, there will already be the localization team, the localization manager, and whoever's kind of involved in that will already be involved at that point, because that person will be saying, right, have you thought about this? Have you done this? Have you got this? How are you going to be presenting us with the text? And then that then goes back to the development team. And then you can then say, right, development team, how are we going to be sending this text to IDOS for translation? And then at that, it could be at that point they're kind of like, I don't know. It's like, well, what do you mean you don't know? So you're kind of asking at that point, right? Okay, you need to be thinking, how we're stripping all this text out, which kind of takes, which is kind of where we come from on that whole kind of LocDirect side of things, and why we created that is that the development guys are creating text in LocDirect. So it's never kind of, so it can be pulled out, it can be pushed in, it can be all types of things, but it's living in one place. And that's something we didn't have before. So that was the whole kind of the key behind it. So so what that kind of gets rid of is that question of, so how are we getting the text? Because it's very simple, LocDirect, or if it's a different system or whatever, it's kind of very simple to say, this is how the text is going to arrive, bosh. But then obviously there's all the other questions of, is gender an issue? Do we have, how much dialogue do we have? What's the costs associated? Are you gonna voice record into all languages, or are you just going to go for French and German? And blah blah blah. All these types of questions are all asked. So that happens super early on as well. So so still super early. These things are kind of happening, but they're not really kind of interfering too hard in the development kind of process. So people are still generating assets, doing all the code, kind of making sure it works, and ensuring that the game is the best game that it can be. So then as you continue through the process, then you get to the point where it's like, right, okay, now we need to kind of understand, what the text is going to be like. So let's get an example of the file you're going to create. Again, not really an issue with us because of what we've done. But back then it would be, right, okay, so here's an example here. The localization people would have a look at the example and go, this is terrible. This is not going to work for us. This needs to be revised. All right, so blah, 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 blah. But usually what would normally happen is, again, you always wanted, and it was a luxury we very, very rarely had, but you always kind of wanted to not localize until you got to beta, where the content was locked. Because the game is still being worked on. The game is still being kind of thoroughly curated. There's still a lot of change until you get to that beta point. And to be honest, a number of times you can get to what you think is a beta, and then it's still a month down the road before you actually really do hit a beta. So you really you want to kind of leave it for as long as possible. But I've worked on projects before where we've had to have the localization sent out before beta because the timeline was so kind of so crushed, and that was always a nightmare because then you were reaching that point where this has been translated, this hasn't been translated, this has been updated, this hasn't been updated. You've got all this stuff and you've got it in an Excel file. And it's like, oh my God, you just want to kill people because it's kind of you have an Excel file with 17 different colors, 5 different tabs, and it's like, okay, so who updated it last? It's like, oh, Dave updated it. It's like, Dave, what did you update? It's like, I don't know what I'd updated. It's like, why? So you really want to leave that for as late as possible, ideally, or when kind of big lumps of content are locked. So that's absolutely fine. But so I have no problem with actually localizing earlier, just so long as people are aware that, of course, as you're doing it, you may well make some changes. The problem was it was never controlled in an effective way, and that's always been the problem. It's like, fine, let's. If you've got 60,000 words, you don't really want to wait until that beta point to actually start translating that, because that's quite a lot of words. So you're going to have to kind of like really kind of push those through quickly. If you've got locked areas, then yes, why not? Let's localize these as we go. But so long as we only do that, so long as we know what's changing as we're going through, rather than like going back to the 17 color Excel file. So that's the thing. It's just having that process in place. So we didn't have that back then. So so beta, we try to leave it as long as possible. Then at that point, you'd be going into the studio. If you're going into the studio to record voiceover, then that's there could, while the recording's happening, you could actually still be making changes in the game. And then there might be things that are being picked up by QA. This doesn't, if you're going from A to B, actually that doesn't really work. There needs to be like an A1 step to explain to the player how you're going to get to B. So we need to kind of create some new audio at that point there. Otherwise, it's going to make no sense. And so you've then got to go back to the studio. I mean, the word pickups, and any time I've ever encountered them, was never greeted with any happiness whatsoever. It was greeted with, "I want to kill you, Mike. When would be a good day to do this? Because I want to do it now." So yes, that was always like a really kind of tragic thing, because of course you're going to so many different countries, you've got so many different languages, and then from all those languages, you've got studio time. The studios might be full. The studios might not be able to just take you straight in and record it and then be done. The actor might not be available, because especially with Commandos, we used to, for the German version, we always used really famous actors. So I think like the voice for Butcher was the guy that used to voice Arnold Schwarzenegger in Germany. So he was like a really well-known person. So when the German players heard Butcher, they'd be like, "Whoa, it's the guy that does Arnie." So so there'd be a real kind of like, "Whoa, this sounds so cool." I don't know if it might not work for everyone. But
wait, Butcher in Commandos?
Yeah.
What did I miss?
Yeah, Butcher. Oh, Tiny.
Oh, Tiny.
The Green Beret. Sorry,
the spy,
Tiny,
right?
Yeah. In Commandos, there was this decision made, which I was never a big fan of, but Butcher is the American name. Oh no, sorry, Butcher's the European name. Yeah, the Green Beret. So he was Butcher in the UK, and then he was Tiny. And was he Tiny? I think he was Tiny in America.
I see. Yeah. So the main character, right, the Green Beret.
No, it's Tiny McHale, Butcher O'Hara, Tiny O'Hara, Butcher. I'm just trying to see which one reads in my head. I think it was Tiny in America, so Tiny McHale, and then it was Butcher O'Hara in the European version, or in everywhere else. It was just America, it was different. I know, tell me. So you must have been playing the American version.
I only know him as Green Beret. Are we talking about the muscle guy?
You didn't have your dictionary out.
No. Wait.
He was called, yeah.
Like his real name was in the game.
In the game, you've got the Green Beret, you've got the Sapper, you've got
Yes.
the Spy, blah
Yes.
blah blah
Yes.
blah. But they actually have names themselves. Yeah, they all have names. So you've got Tiny McHale and Butcher O'Hara. I will kind of Google this up in a minute. It's been so long since I've come into contact with these boys.
Yeah, for some reason when you say Tiny, it reminds me of the of the guy from Commandos 2, the little one that was very agile, that could climb the poles.
That was the thief.
Thief, yes.
Yeah, so Jack O'Hara.
Jack
O'Hara or Jerry McHale in Commandos 2 Men of Courage. Yeah, so it was Jack O'Hara in the UK and Jerry McHale in the US.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, we digress. This isn't really. I suppose it is about localization because a call was made, back on Commandos 1, that they felt that the US office felt that it would be stronger to have different names for the commandos in America.
Mm-hmm.
So actually, that's a very valid localization point. But what it did was it created all kinds of headaches later because I was always such a massive fan of having something in the box, and it made a problem with code as well because the code you would have like a panel that would then have the name of the character, and so we had to therefore have a US version of the code and then an everywhere else version of the code. And so that was a pain in the butt. But also, so I used to love to put like a poster or something in all the boxes, in all the box copies. And so we had one that had the different commandos all kind of like laid out, and it would have their names on there as well. So they had to have 2 versions of that as well. And it was like, oh, whose idea was this? And yeah, we used to have two different two wholly different websites because of this as well. It's like, whose idea was this? But anyway, so that's the thing. So so you do get those things happening too, which was really fun.
Another thing that I didn't get was you mentioned the word pickups. I only know this in relationship to the ladies. So what does a pickup mean when it comes to voice recording? Is it like...
Well, it's been even longer for that side of things for me. So pickups is when you have to go back into the studio. So it's just purely a case of when some audio has changed, some string has changed, and you need to go back into the studio to pick up, and not necessarily to pick up females, but to pick up females or males or whatever. But no, it's unrelated.
Okay. So where did we get to? We get to beta, right?
Oh yeah, we got to beta. Yeah. So at that point there, you're going through doing your pickups and whatever, and then hopefully you're kind of building towards your master candidate. And so the master candidate, you're there, you test it, you make sure it complies with all the certification requirements for PlayStation, Xbox, or GameCube, or whatever it was at the time. And so then you'd go through all those, and then you'd hopefully then hit that gold master. And so back in the day, that would involve having to drive down a motorway or something in the UK, or at like 3 a.m. or something, so that it can then get onto a plane bound for Switzerland or whatever, or Austria rather. And so that was kind of, you got to that gold master. Then you'd hope that everything that needed to be found would be found, and you'd have like a great version. But obviously that has now changed dramatically to where we are today, where you can just continually iterate. And now we are very much at that kind of games as a service kind of model, where you're just kind of releasing weekly updates all the time. You're releasing new packs of content. It's so simple to do this now compared to what it was like in the past. In the past, having a patch was deemed as almost a criminal offense, because it kind of meant that you shipped your game with problems in it. And these days, having a patch is just called, it's not really necessarily called a patch, it's just called like an update or whatever it might be. And so that can have, bug fixes and things, which is well received, but usually it will have bug fixes, but also some tweaks on, somebody might say that the ogres are too powerful compared to the knights or whatever. And so you've got those tweaks going on too. But also we've released the new Vandal pack, or whatever it is, and then people are like, well, the new Vandal pack, I've been waiting for this. And so so it's a great kind of communities being built, and this games as a service has just become such a massive thing now, where you don't just hit that gold master and say, boom, it's gone. go salespeople, may it do well, and potentially work on a patch to kind of fix things that you might then find after that gold master's gone into production. So now you can kind of go, right, okay, so there are these things, but that's because, especially like with Sony, with the platform holders, you'd have a slot that you would have to kind of hit by so that you could then release, because it would take a certain amount of manufacturing time to then hit the shelves and then kind of distribution time. So that's obviously not really a consideration anymore because there's very little kind of physical media. I mean, obviously there's still, big things that come out, Spider-Man, God of War, Last of Us. So there's still those kind of big titles that still need to hit the shelves. But now, because of the enormity of the mobile market and the kind of the regular kind of updates that can happen, I suppose with things now, because again back then there wasn't that kind of broadband penetration that would allow kind of these kind of big updates to just kind of be streamed in, or it would only take 10 minutes to download an update. Back then it would be like, okay, so if we released like 100 meg patch online, people would be like, 100 meg, gee, what? This is so enormous. It's like, wow, it's 100 meg. But yeah, so now it's just so fast that you can kind of drag this stuff. And a lot of the time, if I'm playing something on my phone and there is an update, more often than not, that update's happened within 5 seconds. And you don't really don't care. It's only when you open the game and they change something and you're like, why did you change it? That's when the problem comes in. It's like, I like this mechanic. No, you've changed it. Which happened just the other day with a game that I've been playing a lot. I won't say what the name of the game is, but I've played it a lot, and they completely changed the inventory kind of mechanic that they had, which totally ruined it for me. So it's kind of like, so you post a little message to them to say, you've changed it for me. But now you're in a position now to kind of go, actually, everyone has complained about this. So now we can go back and change that again. Whereas, again, back in the days when we were localizing back then, that would just be a complete nightmare. So it wasn't possible. So I think, there's so many kind of brilliant things in terms of kind of gameplay and kind of tweaks and that games as a service kind of side of things, but also kind of the brilliance of being able to cater things for very kind of specific individual markets as well. I think it's just absolutely phenomenal. So just the ability where you might have a one game and it sells particularly well to 18 to 25-year-olds in one territory, and then you might find that it's really popular in the plus 30 range in another country, and so you can then look at that and look at should we then cater what we're currently kind of working on for maybe that? Just to make it even kind of a larger kind of gap. So if you make it like this game is super popular with 60 plus years old, and then in another territory it's enjoyed by teenagers, you might then want to change the balancing somewhat to then make it maybe slightly easier, or some of the times required to complete some levels make it slightly easier for those people, because the demographic that's coming back is of an older demo. So the ability to kind of tweak and tinker and kind of change these things around is absolutely phenomenal. So I'm very, very jealous of that. So that's post-release. So post-release, there's plenty of lot considerations, much more post-release than there would be much earlier in the process. I think there's, like I said before, there's certain things you need to look at. I think there are companies that actually specialize in looking at code, or looking at potentially kind of just the product plan of what's going to be contained in the game. But certainly it's when it's kind of early code levels would be the time when a lot of these people would be involved. But really kind of identifying, this is going to be a problem in Germany, like it used to be with swastikas, etc. So this is going to be a problem in Germany. This is going to be a problem. Oh yeah, so there was another version. Obviously, there was the non-swastika version of Commandos for Germany, of course. So you've got kind of the different code types, the different releases. And I completely forgot where I was going with this, which is kind of what happened because I just started thinking about Commandos. Yes. And it just flipped me right out.
Yes, I'll put you right back on track, because we have already shipped the game and we are talking about post-release, but I think we haven't talked about localization testing.
No, okay. So we'll come back to testing in a second because now you've just reminded me what the point that I was getting at.
Oh,
So going back, so this whole kind of globalization kind of the game, or internationalization of game, you know, so people will kind of say, okay, so there's a problem with this number of fingers on your character, or there's a problem with flags. Any kind of, they will look through it and say, are there Chinese flags in here? You have to be particularly kind of sensitive. Are there any kind of political references in here? So there are teams of people that will actually look at the code itself or the plans of the code and say, okay, this cannot happen. If you're planning to have a torture scene in this game, then this is going to be a real problem kind of at this point here. I mean, I've worked on a bunch of games where I've had producers around me and they weren't aware that there'd be a horrific torture scene. And then basically, Zero in Japan just went, there is no way this game can come out over here. And Japan were kind of an important territory for that particular title. And it was like, okay, so that's a real nightmare. So yes, okay. So there are people that will spend that time and kind of give that feedback, especially for games. But then I think because of the classification of games in Germany, that's why that whole swastika thing kind of went away, which was a great thing, but obviously a bit too late for Commandos at the time.
mm-hmm.
Right, so localization QA, of course, massively important. But that's the thing. That was like I was saying before about why people kind of back in the day didn't want to localize, because they were like, then we have to do loc QA as well. And then loc QA, they don't find just the same bug in German, French, Italian. Each one is its own kind of localized version that has to be tested completely individually. And so, so that was kind of like, you just had to do it. You really didn't want to do it. And it was a pain because you were just thinking about just getting the box version, the English version out there and done. And that's why it would have been nice to have kind of staggered it, but that was never possible because financial quarterly decisions, quarterly numbers had to be met, of course. So you just didn't have that kind of that flexibility. But yeah, so you would then have that the quarter you need to hit. Fantastic news! You'd have your localization that kind of went through the kind of the cycles. But now I think that whole kind of localization QA thing is everyone understands that if you're going to spend the money to localize it into that language, then it makes no sense to just shove it out there, because you want people to have a great experience. Because if you're selling games as a service, if your first drop is filled with errors, then your games as a service model isn't going to continue working, because people are going to drop without even seeing that kind of the next update that comes on, because they're going to be like, well, this is terrible, so why should I continue to kind of invest my time in playing this? There's a million other games I could be playing right now. So I think a lot of people are far more kind of understanding of the need to do localization QA, and to a lot of people, they won't even do just regular QA. So you kind of think, wow, if you're not going to do regular QA, or you might have some people that will look at QA as, I'll just get a couple of my mates to try it out. It's like, okay, well, great, and that should be nice for some feedback kind of stuff, but that's never going to tell you about what the compatibility is like across different machines. What's it going to be like across different against different devices? You've got so many other things that QA does, not just play the game. But certainly playing the game is a massively important thing, and you need to get hours and hours of it. So you can't really say to your mate, oh, Dave, would you mind spending 72 hours solidly playing my game? It's like, well, yeah, well, I can do. But and a lot of these people, they're not proper kind of QA technicians, QA specialists. This is a skill. This isn't something you can just kind of pick up a game and just kind of go with. You need to be able to report bugs properly. You need to be able to kind of find bugs efficiently. So I think that a lot of people do kind of go, oh, well, we're just going to soft launch it and then that will do, and you kind of go, oh, okay, well, fine, you get some feedback from a soft launch, okay, that's not worry at all. But that's not going to, I mean, unless you have a very kind of a solid way of receiving all of that feedback, then you're going to be creating the most horrific amount of work for yourself as well. So you're just all of a sudden you're going to soft launch, and then 1,000 people, if potentially, are going to send you maybe the same bug, but maybe with a slight difference in some of the bugs, and you're going to have to filter through all of these. So that's absolutely horrifying. So I would always suggest, please use a proper QA company or a proper lock QA company to actually go through and test these properly. But certainly, I think, trusting your buddies to have a look at it is just, you're going to be asking for trouble. But again, going back to the whole kind of, you can fix it pretty quickly, whereas you couldn't before. So I think that's a kind of really positive thing. You can fix it quickly, but that kind of that first impression, if it goes out and it's not solid and doesn't do, the kind of the minimum, the kind of the requirement, then you're going to lose that person, and then you're never going to get that person back again. That person's now kind of gone. But whereas if you can go out with something that's solid, playable, is kind of what they want to play, then they might give you the opportunity to fix what might be a small issue. It might be it might be a small text issue. I think you'll rarely get someone dropping out and saying, "Oh my God, I hate this game so much because instead of using the word pork, it used the word pig. Oh my God, I can't believe it. This is it. I'm done." So I think that, when it comes to localization, unless the text that that's been translated is actually just broken the game in terms of if your mission is to find the prince, but actually the translation says that you've got to find the castle, then basically you're gonna be like, well, I'm looking for the prince, but I can't find the prince, but you're not actually kind of trying to find it. So that breaks the game. At which point you've got someone just running round and round the map, just not, and unless they luckily find what the thing is, which is crap. So LQA, QA, please. You spent all this time, you put all this love and this passion into it. Just see it through to the end.
You gave the example that testers for each language could find the same bug. So I'm wondering, does Localization Qa happen in parallel with the English version? Or does it follow English so that you first fix the bugs?
It should always follow. Yeah, absolutely, it should follow. It does. I mean, it should always be that because the localization QA guys should be primarily just finding, actual language related issues. So you might have a French string in the German version, etc. That kind of stuff, which very very easily happens. So they should be focusing on those things, kind of overlongs. If there's subtitling and the subtitles are running at the wrong speed, or are going too slow, things like that. They should be feeding that kind of stuff back. If it's things like a pop-up appears and then it crashes the game, hopefully you'd find that in the English version. You wouldn't have to worry about that in the French. The classic example is there could be a bug of play game could appear in the middle of the screen. But in the German version, it could be in French. In the Russian version, it could be in Italian, and then blah, 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 blah. So they've all just had that one string has just moved one column over. So it's kind of thrown everything out. So it's a very quick fix. But what you'll find is that each language will report that, obviously. So you need to make sure that ideally, you want someone else to look after that. And obviously we can look after that. But you don't really want to have those 6, 8, 12... 16, however many it is languages, all coming back saying, this is the problem, this is the problem. Because yes, I know it is. I fixed it already. It's going to be in the next version. Please stop bugging me. Please stop bugging me. So it's kind of, you need to have that solid structure so that you can kind of get this text backwards and forwards, get these kind of issues reported and resolved quick. Because especially these smaller developers, they haven't got time to go through all of this. I mean, even the kind of larger ones, there's other stuff that, it simply needs to be efficiently handled. And at the moment, if you're two people making a game, one's art, one's code, and they mix between the two, and some does a bit of business and some does this, that, do you really want to suck all of that time spent on managing these bugs coming back and then fixing the bugs? When you can try to use a system that's out there. There's localization sites. There's the system that we're working on called Gridly, which will have that kind of feature set in there as well, so you can give access to trusted people within those communities, and they can then go in and then make those changes themselves. So if you are a two-man team, you don't even have to kind of think about, who's going to fix these bugs. You can actually allow someone else, trusted. Very important, trusted, because they're just going to put a big swear word in there that's going to be in your game, and they're like, I hate this guy. So somebody trusted can fix it, and then it can go straight into the game, and then you don't even have to think about it. That has to be the future. instead of kind of going through these kind of bugzillas and all the rest of it type ways, and then fixing it yourself. Horrible.
Let's talk about it later.
Yes.
Right now, I'm just curious if there's pseudo localization used in games.
Pseudo, as in like machine stuff.
Yes, where you don't wait for the actual translations, but you just add some extra extended characters. You lengthen the strings to see if the game can still look and behave nicely.
Oh, sure. Yeah, you're not talking about when it's released. You're just talking about during kind of just making sure that everything fits and all the rest of it. Yeah, absolutely. And it's really recommended that everyone should do that. Everyone should put some stuff in there. You know, should have your character set for each of the languages. Make sure they're being displayed correctly. Make sure that, you know, if there is a particular part of the character that goes underneath the line, that the line is kind of isn't cutting across that and all the rest of it. Absolutely. I think that, you know, it would be silly for people not to. I think it's very, very important to make sure you kind of run through all of it to ensure that it all fits properly and that it wraps properly. But, you know, I think that a lot of studios do look into that. Well, I suppose I'm thinking about a couple, and I remember doing that work with a couple of these guys, and but they were quite well established studios. I remember kind of sitting with these guys as they were kind of going through that without me even having to kind of say, "Are you going to do this?" And they were actually kind of doing it already. So there is, you know, but again, it's kind of those guys had been doing it for a while, so I think they were already thinking about all the different kind of kerning required. But I think that, you know, a lot of people probably wouldn't. They probably wouldn't even consider it, which, you know, should again be part of this is one of the checks on the list. Boop, 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 boop. This one here is make sure the font can be displayed properly. Just do a big Google Translate, chuck it all in, see what it kicks out. Do not release with that text, for the love of God, please. But by all means, chuck it in to test it. I mean, it's why not indeed? But unfortunately, I have heard of a lot of studios that have released games with Google translations in them, and you just kind of like, have you actually tried it out? I mean, it's just so bad.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's great for trying to understand the gist of a website, or, you know, that kind of, you know, just to get an understanding of it. But if you're playing a game and it's kind of, you know, instead of having, you know, if you've got continue and you know, it should be the word resume, or, you know, the word's resume. Instead of that, it says curriculum vitae, and it's like, no, it's resume, not resume. Oh, come on now. So it's kind of like, that just looks absolutely terrible in the game. So yes, so a machine translation is, you know, it should never see the light of day in your game. Please, I don't care how tight money is. If you have to, go down the community route and see if you can do something that way, rather than, you know, so you might just have fans that really like the game, want to support your game, and maybe they'll do that for you. If you have the funds, then speak to somebody like us, or, you know, one of the many other localization providers, and then get it done kind of by professional translators. I mean, you might get lucky that one of your fans could be a professional translator, in which case, hurrah! And then, you know, so you get some good stuff. But yeah, certainly, I think just being a native in that language doesn't necessarily mean that you're a translator in that language, because it isn't quite as straightforward as that. In the same way as we were saying about QAing a game isn't just spending a bit of time having a play. You know, these guys are specialists in doing that, as in translators are specialists.
Yeah, that's one of the biggest myths when it comes to games testing. Many people think they'll just be playing games for fun and get paid for it, but that's not the case, right?
No, that is not the case. That is the case. Like, potentially, I need to run into this corner and I need to jump up and down in this corner 120 times to see if I can fall through. It's like, oh my goodness, yeah, while twisting and doing this twist movement while jumping up and down. Oh God, that could be like an hour of your day. Wicked. Oh, you lucky guy, you just play games all day long. It's like, no, today I spent an hour jumping in a corner doing this in the corner. But yeah, so yeah, no, it is such a super kind of myth of that. I mean, it's certainly you know, like one of the tests is, I'm not sure if it's 100 times or is it even more, but you have to press like the start button on a controller.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
You have to press that like 100 times. You have to press it 100 times, and it has happened before where you pressed it the 99th and then 100th time, and it will crash the game.
Wow.
It happens.
That's crazy.
Yeah. Absolutely crazy. So yes, that's like one of the tests. It's like, hey, who wants to do that? It's like, I don't want to do that. I want to jump across a bridge 25 times instead. Yeah, and you can imagine something like Commandos. People will play Commandos, and they'll just be trying to complete the game. And so if you're just trying to complete the game and you find bugs along the way, that's wonderful. But but there's so many different ways to complete each level. Whether or not if you're throwing a stone, or you're going to use the decoy, or you're going to, whatever it is, there's so many different combinations that take you all the way through, and so much potential for bugs within all of that as well, with all the kind of the radius cones and all the rest of it kind of flying around. So you couldn't just test that game by just running through it, unless of course you were just testing that each of the levels loaded, in which case you wanted to have your fastest QA guy running the hell through there, which I think on the first level of Commandos 2, I think I'm going to call out Lawrence, and he did it in like 18 seconds or something ridiculous, something so stupid. Or maybe it was 1 minute 18. But anyway, he basically everything was just like time, bop, 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 and he would make it. But anyway, so the whole idea is that you have to check every single bit of collision. You've got to check it with different weapons, different explosions. Sometimes an explosion set off on the side in this particular part of the environment will just cause a crash as well, because the graphic used for the explosion is then interfering with another part of the environment, which then causes it to fall over. So you've got to do that in numerous locations as well. So it's kind of like, that is not a fun job. Obviously, there's worse jobs. Let's not be crazy here. There are worse jobs out there, but certainly it's not just playing games all day. But anyway, that's me waving the flag for QA guys up and down and all over the place. Way.
We were talking about translation.
Yes.
One of the biggest things to make a good translation is to have a good reference, to have a context, especially when it comes to games where you can have very short strings, but where do they actually appear? Mm-hmm. So I'm wondering how, in your perspective, has the context and reference sharing with translators evolved over the years?
I'd say it's still generally pretty awful.
Okay.
Unfortunately.
My crazy utopian idea is that I just translate somewhere, I go to a string, and somehow magically I can see where exactly in that game that string will appear.
Well, I think that there is the potential for that. I mean, I'm not sure if we've experienced it ourselves, but I think you can. I think there are people out there that have developed systems so that they can select a particular string, and it will take them to a screenshot or something that will then have that. And I think that is actually that happens reasonably. It happens quite a lot. Mm-hmm. So you will get that type of testing that will just be loads and loads of screens, and then the text will time with the screenshot. But seeing it live is a wholly other thing as well. To be able to just jump to any particular point of a game to see that string, because you can see the string on the screenshot, and that's great. But that's not. But then, kind of, what precedes it? Is it part of a conversation, etc.? There's a lot more kind of information that a screenshot itself doesn't really give you all the context. So ideally, you'd want to see it in code. You want to jump to that. That is something I'm not aware that that's ever happened. I mean, that would be phenomenal. The way it currently happens is that you ask nicely if within that Excel file or within LocDirect or whatever kind of system is being used, that there's a column for ID, a column for source, and then a column for description, or kind of some kind of context column. And so from that, then hopefully that's enough information. And if that isn't enough information, then obviously translate a question backwards and forwards to kind of then get that all cleared up. But certainly, I mean, there are some studios who will provide context for every single string, and when you see that, you're like, oh my god, these guys are awesome. And it's a happy day when you see that. You think, oh, this is going to really minimize questions. It's going to make everyone happy. Oh, this is wonderful. And then you get some that just have nothing at all. and then to add insult to injury, then when it comes back, then that developer will then say, and actually out of these 200 strings, 50 of them are too long to go into the interface. And it's like, well, you didn't tell us that there was any restriction on the amount of text. It's like, so that's then another thing you have to then kind of battle with as well. So not only having no context, but also no understanding of the string limitate or the character limitation as well. And so it just creates all this additional work. Whereas if you had a column for ID, a column for source text, a column for any context, and then a column for text dimensions, so for the maximum number of characters on any particular line, then you would then have what you need to then kind of paint this picture. Obviously, there's other ones like gender, or those types of elements that are required. Or if there's placeholders, what does the placeholder stand for? What can the placeholder be removed and replaced with? But certainly, just as a start, having that context and string and character, that would be lovely. It happens far too rarely for my liking, so that is a bit of a shame. But again, that's something that we always kind of keep pushing for, and we keep asking. And sometimes, like I say, some people they provide it straight away. Some people you have to kind of beg for it.
My question about translation is, and you guys also do translation service as well. It's LocalizeDirect. So when you're looking for people, how big of a role does it play if the translators are into games?
They have to be into games. That's an absolutely vital thing for us. There's a whole level of terminology required that's very different to anything else. And especially when a game player, if they're playing a game and then your usual associated word for a particular function is something totally different to what they would normally expect, then that really jars them out of the experience, and they kind of go, oh, this is a weird kind of word. So you might have, I'm just trying to think of, so you might have an inventory, and then you might have like a particular word for inventory, but then somebody else might call it storage or something like that. And it's kind of like, oh, storage, that's I wouldn't expect that, playing Baldur's Gate or something like that. It's kind of like, I'd expect it to be an inventory. So it's kind of, there's a kind of a glossary, a kind of a terminology requirement that unless people have been, working with games, then they're just not going to quite get that. And you can, when we have stuff, when we have people who test for us, or they do a test translation, when we then send it to one of our existing translators, regularly they will come back saying this person hasn't worked on games before because they've completely kind of missed kind of a lot of these kind of key phrases that would be required. But that's not, there'll always be the opportunity. There will always be companies that will have non-gamers translating for them. We might do so. We totally focus on games, but we might have some legal text that for a EULA or something like that. In which case, then we'll speak to one of the guys that we have on our books that does legal translation, and specifically that. So we'll have those guys come in to do that stuff, which isn't specifically game terminology based. And so then we'll save those guys for those things. But there will be other companies that will just go, hey, you're a translator, that's great. And maybe that way they can start developing some experience in doing some game translations. But yeah, for us, it's always, do you play games? It's, and they don't necessarily need to be kind of, play 10 hours of games every day or something. It's more a case of, that they understand, how games kind of are put together, but, how games kind of are structured as you play through. You have your tutorial or kind of small area that you kind of go through when you start off with. So you really have to explain in a very simplistic way, what you're doing, what the steps are that you're going through on this tutorial. And then as you progress through the game, then you can kind of change that kind of that intonation, that kind of that general tone as you go through the game. But certainly to start off with, it needs to be kind of using lots of very kind of simplistic tone to kick things off. So it's just, it's that kind of thing. So for us, you have to be a games-focused translator.
Does the same apply for project managers? And I've shared this with you before, that I try to get myself into games localization because I think I'm a pretty good project manager in general when it comes to localization, but many times I was turned down and the people said that you have no experience in games localization. Do you think from the project management perspective, is it that different from doing
project management?
Yes.
Localization project. Okay. Yeah, because obviously if it was just at a game studio, just doing a PM, like I'd be doing a PM role at a studio, that's understandable. But certainly, I think for us, no. I think we would like our PMs to have, and I think that apart from one, I think that we all like games, and some of the people, some of the PMs really love games. And, so a game can come in and they'll be like, oh my God, this game's just coming. I absolutely love this game. Oh, this is so cool. And so, so you get really excited and it's kind of like, yeah. And that person can regularly answer questions about any kind of, any text that comes in. And they'll be like, oh no, well, because, I play Terraria or whatever it is. And it's like, no, this type of object is this and this. And it's like, oh, okay, now I get it. So you can kind of catch things before even having to ask the studio. So, so that's a great saving for them. So it's great for that person to be a gamer, but for us, it's not vital at all. I think that the project management skills are far more important than the understanding of the differences between Halo and Fallout. So let's say it's far more important to kind of understand that you've got potentially 100 translators that you're going to have to kind of speak with on a regular basis and fire things out, track them, bring them back in, make sure that everyone's happy, make sure questions are being answered, and not allow your head to blow up. So, so that's the key thing for us. So is this just an extended job interview?
Maybe, I don't know. You tell me. How am I doing so far?
Well, it's okay. I think some of the questioning could be a bit deeper, but yeah, it's fine.
I assume that for your role, being a gamer and coming from the industry is quite crucial, I would say.
From a kind of biz dev perspective, yeah, absolutely. I think that kind of having that understanding, having that immediate understanding, well, having kind of quite a decent kind of network of people I know as well is obviously super useful as well, because you can go to most shows and you'll always know some people there that you can then kind of kick off some networking with. But certainly having that experience and being able to then impart that to, like I said before, kind of students or some people who are just kind of starting out. It's I do have a lot of stuff that I can share with a lot of these guys. So yes, I think for me certainly it's kind of being able to kind of speak to people in a fairly kind of coldish way necessarily if it's like a networking thing, but to be able to kind of say, I know exactly what you're going through. This, I can tell you that this is what I did back then. This is the kind of thing that we need to avoid. And now using my knowledge of localization, I can say, right, and then these are the things you need to look out for on this side of things. So that becomes a very, very useful tool. But yeah, I think, it's kind of, I think one of the kind of crucial understanding things, and I think when with my coming from gaming, is understanding that games just they're in such a kind of flux all the way through. They're really kind of up until the very last minute. They're still kind of being changed and adapted. And now, because of mobile gaming and all the rest of it, that that it carries on afterwards as well. So they're always being touched. They're always being tinkered with. They're always but the idea is that we really understand that that because stuff changes so much, you can't ever say, right, this is the final version. This is the final version, because it's never going to be the final version. There's always going to be one more drip. There's going to be 2 more bits for this batch. Oh no, somebody picked this up in QA. You need to do this. And and a lot of people would get very, very pissed off and say, oh, I can't work like this. This is crazy. But I think, because we have that understanding, it's kind of like, well, this is the way it works. And I think that a lot of developers really welcome that, because mostly, not all, but most kind of go, I'm really sorry. This is another kind of 20 words. It just came from nowhere. And we're like, nah, we'll send them over. Let's go. Come then. Let's get them turned around as quickly as possible. And also the speed thing as well. So sometimes it'll be, oh my God, this is 1:00 in the afternoon. I need this back by 4:00. And that's when we're like, right, everyone drop tools. Let's go, bosh. And then we have to kind of get cracking and get that out and back so they can kind of hit that timeline. And that's what they get from us. Maybe they don't get from other people. So I don't know. Maybe they do get it from other people. I don't know. I don't work for those other people. But certainly we kind of go, these guys need it. They're absolutely desperate. They've been working for the last 3 weeks on getting this latest kind of build ready to go, and it's the Valentine's Day version or something, and it's Valentine's Day tomorrow, and it's like if it goes out in 2 days, then they've kind of missed the boat. So it's like, right, come on, people, what can we do here? It's Halloween. It's Halloween. Let's go. So I think that having that experience is a real benefit.
I would like to talk about 2 acronyms which I think are very close to your role. And that is EOL and ROI.
Right.
So let's say I created a game and I come to you for advice. What should I localize with my game? And how would you help me calculate ROI? Is that something that you help your clients?
We wouldn't. No, that's something that would be handled by the clients or from maybe potentially maybe a publisher, or some kind of consultant team or something like that. We wouldn't work out ROI at all. It'd be a case of we would simply provide a cost for that translation pass or for licensing of the tool. But yeah, because ROI is an incredibly difficult thing to really kind of nail. You can have like a ballparky one, and then obviously one at time of launch, and then you can work out from that point, because there's so many moving parts. All of a sudden, you've then invested twice the amount of time in QA that you thought you were going to invest, so your ROI takes a massive ding, and then it's kind of like, oh, okay, then that's kind of moved around a hell of a lot. All we can kind of say is, this is what it's going to cost you to localize into those languages, and if you and then what we can then say is, actually, if it's only going to cost you £500 or €500 to localize into these 4, because it's a very light game, so it's going to cost you €500, and then it'd be a case of, okay, so how does that sound? And they'll say, oh, well, that sounds great then. In which case, then we will suggest, okay, so the languages you've actually currently chosen have really high language proficiency. So if that €500 works for you, what about swapping that language for this language, where the language proficiency is not that good, but it's a very good market, and and actually kind of alphabet wise, there's not it's not like Arabic, which would then you have to change the flow of the text. So it might be Turkish, for example. Turkish is actually a really great market, huge penetration of mobiles. It's a case of, all right, so could you potentially make more money in Turkey than you would do in Italy, for example? So we are very kind of open with, okay, so you've got this list. This is what, this is what the cost is going to be. How about this and this and this? For example, I said before about Steam and Russian. If they're doing it, okay, so what platforms is this? Oh, it's PC. Oh, I see. There's no Russian on this list. You should probably swap one of these languages for Russian, like, immediately. So I think we aren't kind of, we think it's massively important to make sure you have the right markets you're going into. But I think kind of ROI, yes, super important. But I think that it would be just absolutely insane if the money you spent on a localization didn't improve your ROI, because unless you're making some kind of a text adventurer, which is going to cost like €20,000 in for French only, then most of the time there's not going to be like a big problem for hitting kind of most of the usual languages. It's never going to cost you that much that you're not going to make back quite quickly. But I think people are they seem to be more interested in just hitting those, like hitting figs, and not kind of really kind of considering what are those other kind of big markets that they could be going into, because there's this kind of preconception of figs are the ones I must always hit. It's like, no, you don't have to. You can chop and change. You can move them around a bit. There's a lot of money in figs, but if you're doing Spanish, is it a case of should you be perhaps is your game going to be far more popular in Latin America than it is in Europe? So is it a case of, actually, let's make a Latin American version rather than the European version, and then do it that way? So in the long response was, no, we don't work with the return on investment, but we do try to kind of provide information as to how they can try to maximize on their spend with us. And we don't just go, yeah, give us all the languages, we'll take them all, because that would be crap. Especially because we do deal with a lot of small studios, and that extra 500 quid or whatever, extra 500 euros could be quite an important amount of money for these guys.
So if you are a small game studio and I come to you for advice, and I have very limited budget, would you rather say that I should localize less for more languages, or try to go like a full localization into, let's say, fix?
Okay, no, great question. So I think there's genre questions that would come out of that initially. I think that if you're making like a match 3 game, then really
what does it mean? Match 3?
A match 3 game like Candy Crush. So a match 3 game where you have to match 3 things.
Oh, a match 3.
Well, what did you think I said?
I thought it was like some special category of games.
Yeah. So match 3 is all those types of things. So you get fantasy match 3s and whatever. But yeah, so the idea is that you just 3 are the same, or 4 of the same, or 5 are the same, super chain, whatever. And so it's that kind of game. So those ones don't have a huge requirement for in-game translation, because usually they're quite text light, or there might be like a very flimsy narrative. I think things like Gardenscapes, actually they've created quite an in-depth kind of storyline to it. So maybe you would want to spend more on getting all of those really working well, because I think that narrative is a really important part of Gardenscapes and Homescapes. So you need to look at the title itself and whether or not it needs that in game, because a lot of games, like there are some games, I can't think what it's called now, but there's like some runners, for example. You might have a runner, and Subway Surfers, you don't really all the text in there is not absolutely vital. I'm sure that Kilu will translate all of it because they're a massive company and they go, we want the best experience for everyone, so they translate everything. It's wonderful. So what would be more important if you were a small developer and you wanted to publish this game, and it was a game that was quite text light, but really limited money? I would look more at doing the store text rather than the in-game text. As a minimum, I would do store text, and if it was I can spend a bit on this and a bit on this, I would probably suggest you spend more, or combine the stuff from the in-game, or maybe choose 2 languages that are like the most important languages to hit, because language proficiency is so low.
Mm-hmm.
Then to make it in those. So, for example, if you're making a Chinese version and a Japanese version, those would be the ones to really kind of go for, or an Indian version, or whatever. So those would be the things, and then everything else would then be the store text. I think store text is the number one thing you should always go for, especially if you're unlimited.
Michael, I remember one presentation that I was watching a long time ago. It was from King, and it was about big data, how they utilize big data. I'm wondering if in your experience you have seen big data influencing localization in any way.
Not that we've had exposure to. I can totally see how it would, but without actually kind of having that to hand, couldn't really comment. But certainly, I think people's kind of buying experiences, stuff like what's at this time during lockdown for so many countries, what are the kind of important things, and whether or not those important things are suddenly are becoming really kind of pushed within games themselves. So you might well have a game that has a kind of a bar area or something like that, and you really kind of promote the bar area because nobody can go to a bar at the moment, and it's like, oh, everyone come to Mike's bar and come and hang out in Mike's bar, and everyone's like, yes, Mike's bar, and then you'd spend some money on kind of making Mike's bar really cool. I can definitely see how kind of there are things happening over time at that period that you could then kind of expand on and then bring into a localization front. Certainly, I think there's, it's a bit scary, the whole big data thing, but certainly I think that could easily have a lot of effect on localization.
So let's go back to your time with Eidos and when you guys decided that you want to do something together. I actually wanted to ask this question in the very beginning, but then we somehow started talking about localization and the game process.
Stupid localization. Oh, gee. Just gets in the way.
Yeah. I'm wondering if you remember the time when you guys sat together somewhere and you decided that, okay, we're leaving the game production and now we're going to start our own company.
Yeah, it was in a bar.
Mike's bar.
As all great things happen. Yeah, it wasn't Mike's bar, unfortunately. That closed down in a suspicious fire. I'm not sure what happened. We just sat down and just kind of said, we spent so long making games, and with varying successes, because some of the games that I worked, because I was always an external producer, and Matthias and Chris were internal productions. So they actually, Chris started one of the first Swedish developers many years ago, and was quite successful from that, and made not Colin McRae, Tommy Hakkinen, one of those. I don't know, World Rally Championship. That's it, World Rally Championship. So they did that, and that was super successful. So they'd been making games. Matthias was also part of that team as well. So they've been making games for ages, varying success, and it just seemed like at the time it was very much a case of we put so much love and investment into making something that if it doesn't hit a sweet spot, or if it doesn't kind of capture something at that particular time, then you run the risk of it just disappearing. And I've worked on games that were, I thought, phenomenal, and it just whether the marketing spend wasn't there, or it just wasn't kind of the right time, or didn't get the right kind of coverage, it never really kind of did the numbers that it could have done if more people had played it and understood it, and whatever. So I think that applied to all of us, and we were kind of a little bit kind of frustrated by all of that. And especially I would imagine today it's of particular frustration, because you have so many games being released every single day that disappear without trace, and a load of those games are great games, but they just it don't get that kind of that opportunity, that little flappy moment that makes it suddenly go poof and it just jumps up. So obviously that was a reference to Flappy.
Yes,
the game.
Yes.
Just for all those localization friends out there. So we kind of said, okay, well, let's do something that that shouldn't be like a punt, but it's more like a real kind of calculation on what part of the industry is going to continue to grow, and what can we do within that area of the industry because we wanted to definitely stay in games. I mean, that was just never even a consideration. So what could we make that was going to kind of make something better? And so we decided, a tool would be great to kind of marshal all that together. And localization is just going to continue to grow and grow and grow and grow, we think, anyway, until some point in the future where we all have Babel fishes in our ear, and then that's that. And our eyes, obviously, as well. Once we have all that sorted, ready translation eyes, and then the actual translation process works properly. So we just thought that would be a great kind of thing that we could kind of work on. And so we've continued doing that. So we did that. So that's now been 11 years now. And now we're working on Gridley, which is currently in beta trials at the moment. And that takes it a step further. So it's not only just the localization, but it's also kind of a lot of data interaction as well. So kind of tweaking values within gameplay, within the code itself. And then also being able to interact with kind of in-app purchases and things without having to actually kind of take it out into another format. So the whole Gridley thing is, again, I don't want to do like this shameless promotional kind of nonsense and stuff, but basically our idea was, let's work in a field where we can add a lot of value and then kind of expand on that, and that's what we're doing.
Mm-hmm.
No more promotion.
Now I'm actually curious, so let's do some.
Oh, okay. Let's do more
of
that.
More self-promotion.
Yeah. So the idea is that
let's first start with LocDirect.
Okay.
Is it LocDirect, right? That's the CMS that you started creating. So
that's right.
If I'm a developer, does it mean that I put the strings there, or it extracts the strings where I have somewhere else?
It can do. It can work either way. So how lots of studios use it is that they will actually create the strings within LocDirect, And then using the API, you can then push that text into their editor, which will then display in game or just straight into the game itself. So that works that way. And then so because the text is in LocDirect already, then when you want to have it translated, you just kind of click the "This is ready for translation" button, and then ourselves or keywords or whoever it might be will then take that file, translate it, and then push it back through the system. Once it comes back into the system, then again using the API, you can then push back out into the game again. So you have this kind of this flow that goes through, and so there's kind of a lot less human interaction. And certainly by having everything in kind of one central repository, it just means things don't go missing. Everything's kind of is kept kind of controlled. So the versions are never kind of has this been, so you'll have text, this text has been translated, but the text has now been changed. And this obviously automatically goes, oh, I need to be changed as well. So that never goes missing. And so at the end of it, you can then see, okay, I need to fix all of these strings. So LocDirect is pretty much that. It marshals everything. You can set things like maximum text length. So what I was saying before, you can add your context in there as well, so the translators see everything. If they have questions, they ask them through the system as well. So if later on another language is required, those questions on that string are already there and already answered by the dev team. So if you then decide later on to do a Turkish version, then the questions and the answers are there. So it means that the developer has less trouble later on as well. So it's the whole kind of central repository, looks after stuff, doesn't let things go missing, doesn't let things go missing, and basically it's kind of it's improved a lot of people. A lot of people that have been doing it for a long time, they always say, God, I wish I had this like 15 years ago or whatever. It's kind of like all these kind of old school people kind of like, oh, this would have been so helpful. And obviously for the people who haven't been through the blood and guts before, they will soon learn of the blood and guts, and then they will want to use something like LocDirect to make the blood and guts go away.
So you started as a tech company, right? And then eventually, I assume based on a demand, you added translation services to Linux?
Yes, exactly that. Yeah. So we had, it was the tech side of things. And we had a few studios who were using the system, really liked the system, and just kind of went, well, seeing as it's all there, could you not just take it and translate it? And we kind of thought, I suppose we could. I mean, we can look into it. So we did a bit of research as to whether or not we could actually kind of do this, and we started speaking to a bunch of localization buddies and kind of getting kind of an understanding of what kind of process we should be going through to make sure we get the right people in. And after doing a bit kind of more kind of exploratory stuff, then we decided, actually we could do this, and so we then kind of put some listings out to find some freelance translator guys that have the required qualifications and the understanding of games, and that love playing games. And so now we've developed a list of like kind of 150 or so freelancers in multiple languages, and they're obviously all native in their language, obviously. Just want to just to clarify that. If it's very, I mean, I don't know if this is going to be a contentious thing, and I probably shouldn't even say this, but if I get an application that says I work from French into English, and from German into French, and then from French into German, I'm like, this always scares me a little bit. It's kind of like you have to have like you should always work into your native language. You shouldn't be kind of like I wouldn't feel at all comfortable, even though I can speak Spanish, I would never translate into Spanish. And I suppose I'm a bad example because my Spanish is crappy. But it's the kind of, you will never be, even though you're phenomenal at speaking a particular language, it will never be the same as a native. And I think that whenever I see one of those applications that has this multiple arrow kind of, I do this to this and this, and you know what, I also do this, and I can cook Chinese food. It's like, dude, there's too much on there. There's too much on, I just want you to do this to this, and then maybe you can do, a Spanish variant into this as well. But the native language has to be the same thing, please. I can do Russian into English and English into Russian. No, you can't. No, you can't. You think you can, but you can't. So yes, so please don't apply to us. The I'm getting a bit. I think I'm getting a bit giddy with all the heat.
Yeah.
I need to go and fill my glass up in a second. Whew. So anyway, yes, did I answer your question?
Yeah. So I'm wondering now how Gridly ties into this whole thing. Since it's a new thing that you're working on, will it be an extension of LocDirect or will it be a competitor?
Yes. No, it won't be a competitor as such, because what we're going to do is we're going to put all the hooks in so that current LocDirect users can very easily transition into Gridly. So Gridly will be superior to LocDirect. That's kind of just nailed on. It's going to have a load. It's going to have pretty much all the functionality from LocDirect, but it will be browser-based, which is obviously a big jump already. But also it will have the way it's kind of the way the architecture is structured will allow us to have these absolutely huge projects. So we've had, I think, 1 billion cells has been what we've tested up to so far. So you can have these grids that can be absolutely phenomenal. But obviously everything can be filtered, everything can be kind of organized in a certain way, but these can be absolutely massive and load up in seconds as well. So it's really important for us to make it really, really fast. So one of the kind of the things that we have with LocDirect at the moment is, if you do have a really big project, and this is no spoilers because all of our clients know this is a thing, but if it's a really massive project, then there will be some slowdown because the way that the underlying code has been set up wasn't ever built to handle like 1 million words. So it was never kind of set up for that. Whereas with Gridly, we purposefully, those are the first things we wanted to make sure we could do was really fast loading times, really enormous sets of data. So it will do all the stuff that LocDirect can do and more. But it also, the way that the information will be structured as well, and through the API again as well, is it will be able to speak with different parts of the game. So it won't necessarily then just be able to kind of say, okay, this is the text for play game, and place that into the French version with this French text, blah, blah, blah. And it will kind of do all that as you would expect it to with LocDirect, etc. But what it will also be able to do is affect other parts as well. So if you do have some in-app purchase text, you can then have all of that text within LocDirect as well, and then you can push that to whichever location you want to as well. Now, I'd have to look at whether or not you can actually push through to the actual submission stores themselves. That one I'm not entirely sure if that's actually working yet or not. But I think the intention would be that you would be able to press a button, and then it would just go into the app store, it would be submitted to the app store process. But the other side is it gives the studio the opportunity to actually kind of tweak values as well. So if you're finding that a particular price point isn't quite doing the business for a particular language, then you can change the price point within Gridly as well and then push that through too. But also if you're finding that actually the values of the armor of utter forgetfulness is far too powerful, then you can change the values within. You could set it up to be able to change the values in one area as well. So not only are you kind of tweaking with text for the game itself, but you can be tweaking values of your offering as well as you're actually kind of as you've got it all together in one place. So I know it sounds kind of disjointed, but the idea is, again, like with LocDirect, you've got this central repository. You've got this one area that contains everything. Now, it doesn't contain the code itself, but you set up all of these kind of grids. You set up a project with numerous grids, localization things, translation memory. You can have in-app purchases. You can have all these kind of different grids, and you can have all the grids speaking to each other. So you know that if something changes here, then the dependency will then flag those dependencies as out of date, or those need to be updated. So you can see all of this stuff working in one place. I think people are going to be the demos that we've had, and we've demoed it to a few people. They seem to be quite excited by it, by having kind of everything in one place. So we've got high hopes. We've got so in beta at the moment, and we have our soft launch-ish type thing mid-September. So mid-September we'll actually kind of allow people to start using it properly. But yeah, so that will just continue to be iterated and expanded and developed further over time. We've got big plans.
Who is behind the development?
The development it's the same guy. So it's it's Matthias and Chris as well over in that's our Swedish office, and they're the marshals of the process. But then we also set up a studio in Vietnam. In Vietnam, we've got Tree over there, who's the studio manager, and we have 20 people, I believe the count is now, over there actually working on the development of the tool. And so, well, not at the moment because Matthias and Chris can't fly over there, but obviously there would be regular kind of Skype chats and flights and things and meetings over there to keep that all up to date. But yeah, no, so we're super happy. We think it's really come along. Now we're just getting to that point now where we really need to kind of like make sure that the beta trial part of it is not just for the testing, like we were saying before. Get some official people to do that, which we are going to. But this is more a case of getting the beta guys to come in and actually kind of go, oh, you know what, I'd really like it to do these things, or does it do this and this and this? And we can say, actually, no, it doesn't do that. What a brilliant idea! Let's kind of incorporate that. Or this does something that we thought it would work in a different way, so we can kind of look at it that way. So yeah, so we're super excited by it. But who knows? We need to still hit that sweet spot. But we think we've created something that, especially from a games perspective, and games as a service particularly, we think that people find it really useful to be able to actually, I want to tweak something. I'm on the train, and I want to tweak a value for an in-app purchase or whatever, and you can do it right there, push it through, and then it can be live.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's that kind of functionality is going to be like a massive win. So,
why did you decide to have an office in Vietnam?
A number of things really. There was the English proficiency was, and we've been talking a lot about English proficiency over the last little bit. Was really excellent, really excellent. We've got we found guys over there, brilliant English. I know I'm sure there's other countries that would boast this as well, but certainly we were very happy with the guys out there. The technical ability, let me sit up. The technical ability is superb as well. Got some really great guys out there, and Vietnam is awesome, and we like Vietnam a lot. So that was kind of, it made things easier as well. But I think that we found some key people out there that really kind of shared the kind of the vision, and that kind of made. It helped us kind of make that decision as well. So we're very, very happy with Vietnam.
Did you have the office since the start, or was it just added later?
It was not since the start of LocalizeDirect, not 11 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
No, this was 4 years ago now, maybe? 4 years ago in Ho Chi Minh. It's lovely. Oh no, you've been there, I think, haven't you? Have you been there?
Yes.
You have, yeah. What a fantastic place. So I recommend it to everyone out there. Go visit when you can. Obviously, but I think there's been no deaths there for a long, long time from Corona. Obviously there's been other deaths, I'm sure, but not from Corona.
People don't die there.
Yeah, it's a magical place. You just turn into like a green paste that then fed to other people.
If you don't get hit by a car, right? Crossing the street.
Exactly, yeah. So be very careful when you cross roads, or just close your eyes and go for it. One or the other.
How do you go about maintaining your company culture in such a place as Vietnam? And what is your company culture?
Well, I suppose that if we have something that's kind of a kind of definition as such, I think it's one of our kind of key kind of mantras, and what we really always want to push is that it's our kind of our desire to always be genuine. I think that's kind of like, this is really super important to us, that it's not kind of the fast buck, it's not kind of I can deliver something when I can't deliver something. It's really kind of, we want that kind of that trust, that kind of that understanding that when you speak to us, you are going to get that level of trust, that kind of that genuine response from us. So I think that is kind of a really kind of key thing for us. I think the idea of having everyone will want to have great quality, great cost, blah 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 blah, blah, that kind of usual stuff. But I think in a less kind of that tangible is more the case of understanding that when they come to us, that they're going to get upfront, honest kind of deliberation and decision making, and not this kind of any kind of hidden kind of nonsense whatsoever. And I hope that that's what people receive and agree with. And if you do agree, please like this video. Anyway, so so I think that's kind of the key thing there. And I think that when recruiting for the guys in the Vietnam office, I think that's something that with the main kind of pair over there, they're people that we can definitely see have our kind of need for trust, the need for kind of genuine reasoning, and they shared those values as well. So I think that so we kind of really want them, and we trust them to make sure that they're bringing the right people on that are going to fulfill kind of the vision that we all have.
When you said need for trust, I'm like, is that the new game from EA?
Hey, need for trust. Put it into 7th gear.
Okay, let's start wrapping this up. And I just want to talk about you, only you, Michael.
God, are you going to ask me some kind of really searching question?
Because you mentioned about being genuine, I'm wondering how people react to your humor. If you got any feedback on that.
Usually with howls of derision.
I don't even understand those words.
and hate, and just unmitigated hate, normally. I don't know. I think, people kind of... I usually get on with most people. I think I can probably count on one hand the people that I haven't. I don't know. I just think that people... I think that you kind of know that if I'm pissed off about something, I'm going to say I'm pissed off about something, and they know that there's not going to be... I'm not going to go round someone's back and say it to someone else. I'll just say it straight to that person. So I think that's kind of a thing that people understand. And I think that, I quite like having a beer. A lot of other people quite like having a beer. And then we all go to Mike's pub in Vietnam. So no, I just think, I've always found it quite easy to get on with people. And I think that, as long as you kind of don't take yourself too seriously, don't be a dick on the way up, because on the way down, then you're going to get your face kicked in. Just be genuine. I think that's the kind of the really important thing. And I hope people like me. And if you don't. Your choice.
If you don't like Mike, please like this video and subscribe.
Yeah. If you don't like Mike, definitely like the video. Yeah.
What would you say, Mike, is your weakness?
Oh.
Getting deep.
I'm gonna say like one of these weaknesses, which is actually a massive strength. My weakness is that I just like reading books too much. I just love. It's just such a weakness. No, my weakness. I don't know. My weakness is my weakness. Again, this is so shit as well, right? But yeah, my weakness is that I don't switch off, right? Which is kind of like. I suppose it is a weakness, because from a wellness perspective, it's not the greatest thing, because I'm just always thinking about work. And it's positive in the sense that I get lots of work done, but it's not very positive from a kind of internal and kind of a wellness perspective. So yes, I think that my weakness is that I would love to build up just the ability to just go, screw this. And I suppose because I'm one of the founders, I have like a real vested interest. So you kind of like I suppose maybe if I was just working, or not just working, if I was an employee, then maybe I could kind of go, right, screw this. I'm done for the weekend. I'm not even going to check my phone until Monday morning. Then that would be awesome. But I've never been in that position at all. I've always taken my laptop on holidays. I've always kind of spent 3 hours in the hotel room when the kids are splashing in the pool and all the rest of it. So that's my weakness. My other weakness is beer. Let's just go for it. Let's just say beer and aftershock and
what does it mean, aftershock?
Aftershocks are these little shots that you can do. You get red aftershock and blue aftershock. I don't know if it's everywhere, but it's in the UK, or used to be in the UK. I mean, I haven't had it for years. But what you would have is the red one tasted of cinnamon. And so you'd take it in and you'd have to hold it in your mouth for 20 seconds while everyone's counting. You can feel it burning. Like sometimes if you've got like a really potent mouthwash, and you hold it in a bit too long, you're like, like that. But you have to hold it in. And then at the very end, you go, you drink it, and then you have to go like that with it. And when you do it, it makes you immediately start coughing and spluttering.
Uh-huh.
but you've got to try to hold that in. So back in the day, you'd have 20 people all doing exactly this, screaming because it was basically burning the inside of their mouths. But it's not on fire. It's just because of the cinnamon. So yeah, so Aftershock, and of course Drambuie, which is my drink of choice.
I don't know that either. What is it?
Drambuie is like a whiskey-based liquor, and you can actually set fire to it. So what you should do is you take one, you put it in your mouth, and you set fire to it in your mouth.
That's where the dragon comes from, right?
That is the dragon.
Makes sense. What are you curious about right now?
What am I curious about? I'm curious about, well, from a kind of like the usual kind of, are we going to find a vaccine? That's my main curiosity. It's not really a localization one, but the vaccine would be a really sweet thing very, very soon. But curious about from a localization perspective, I mean, I'm curious about, will we get to a point, and how long will it be till we get to a point where machines will actually be able to do that role? I think, I've spoken to people involved in the technical side of this and the actual kind of programming and and dealing with teams that do that. And they're super buoyant and like, "Whoa, have you heard this? It's really awesome, and it uses AI this and blah blah blah." And it's like, no, it's still crap, mate. It's still nowhere near where it needs to be before it can ever replace a human. And I don't know if that point will ever come, but it's just, well, I think that's still going to be years away, unless some kind of incredible alien intervention occurs, along with the warp drive. So I think that it'd be interesting to see where that goes and how long that's going to take. I think what else is interesting is what kind of effect coronavirus will have on all the different markets. Will it? Because obviously there's been a huge spike in most sales in most stores. Obviously not in not physical content so much. But will it continue? Will people not go out so much? Will people not go to shows so much? Will work happen from home? Will we be Zooming all the time? It's kind of like what's going to happen out of the back of this, because this is a real kind of, loads of companies have managed to find a way of working remotely that they weren't before. And now people are kind of looking at it going, actually, we're going to save a shitload of money by not having to have an office and then just doing this remotely. And it seems to work okay. And maybe we'll just get together once every couple of months and have a couple of beers. And then that will be kind of, that kind of socializing part of it. So I'm interested to see what's going to happen out the back of this. And, of the things that we've been forced to use, how many of those things have been super positive, and therefore we're going to carry on doing that. I mean, where I am, we're friends with various neighbours, but socially distanced. We've been in each other's front gardens, which was totally unheard of before this lockdown. It'd be like drinking out the front of your garden, and this is very uncouth. But now it's like, hey, it's Saturday, let's go sit out the front. So kind of like that seems like something now that I'd quite like to hold on to, because it's a really nice way of socializing. You get people that come past and you can talk to them, and we've talked to people we would never normally talk to, because everyone's just so focused on kind of their house and just and they're maybe two neighbors. But we've talked to all kinds of people we wouldn't normally. So we've kind of created and fostered this really incredible kind of community now, even though it's all socially distanced community. So that's been a really positive thing. So I think that probably applies to localization, to gaming as well, and how people actually kind of work in teams. So I think it's all super interesting, and it'd be great to find out soon, once we're all actually allowed out of our houses without fearing touching something that somebody sneezed on.
Those were the positive things. What do you think is wrong with our industry?
What is wrong? Okay, so I think that what is wrong could be shysters, but then that's every single industry. But people who say that they're translators for a certain language and aren't, or people that say, yes, I've done these games and I'm fully versed in this and this, and they haven't. But I mean, you're never going to get rid of shysters. But it would be great to get rid of those because they're really super annoying. I think people who do translations but actually give it to their friends to do and don't do it themselves, that's very naughty as well. I'd like that to end. It's kind of like, wow, this text is really poor. How is this text so poor? Like, oh, I had to give it to my friends. Like, well, okay, we've stopped working now. Thank you very much for that. So yeah, and you know, we have NDAs in place and all this kind of stuff. It's like, wow, what are you doing? Okay, so there's that. There's shysters and dodginess. Get rid of that. But worried about stuff. I mean, so long as China still keeps accepting Western games and non-Chinese games into China, then the future still looks pretty rosy. So that's a key one there. But yeah, so I suppose one of the worries is, you know, are we reaching any kind of saturation point? You know, so many games come out every single day. So many of them are derivative. That, you know, the actual kind of true evolution stuff, you know, regularly just gets missed because, you know, people are kind of like, hey, it's match 3, I'm going to play another match 3 game, or it's a runner, or I like runners, I'm going to play another runner. But so any kind of innovation, is that just getting missed? And that's what I'd worry about as well, because I do like a bit of innovation.
What are the things that you change your mind about?
I mean, it's really difficult to answer because I like most things. So it's rare that I then dislike them later on. I changed my mind recently. I was drinking lager, and I decided actually I've kind of gone off lager, so I moved over to more of an ale, and that was nicer. And sometimes so I've kind of gone off pink gins, and now I stick with the regular non-pink gins. So that's something I changed my mind about.
That's very deep, Michael. Thank you for sharing.
Not localization based at all. I think on a kind of maybe a somewhat deeper level, I think that I suppose I should maybe touch on the whole kind of George Floyd stuff, and how you kind of when you kind of, because there's been far more kind of interaction, far more kind of observation on, you know what, as a white person, I should be paying far more attention and be far more understanding of, you know, what exactly do black people go through, you know, and actually kind of trying to kind of read more, trying to, you know, watch more, trying to kind of immerse myself more in how lucky as a white person I have it. So I think that, you know, that's something I've certainly changed my mind about, because I know lots and lots of black people, and those black people are they're just mates of mine who are black people. And it's like, okay, that's what they are. That's fair enough. Job done. But I'd never really think about how much harder they've had to work to be kind of, you know, within my producer group or whatever, you know. So it might just be like a room of people, how much harder they've had to work, you know, what kind of, you know, I never really thought about my black mates having, you know, being stopped by the police in their cars and things like that. You kind of think, well, because it doesn't really happen to me.
Yes.
So I just assume it doesn't happen to other people. And then all of a sudden your eyes are opened into, actually, it happens loads, absolutely stupid amounts. And, you know, and so you start going, well, I'm going to watch 13th. I'm going to watch, you know, When They See Us. I'm going to kind of watch this. I'm going to read more. And you kind of, and you, as you're reading it, you're kind of going, this is just insane. So I've really kind of changed my mind. So this is going back to your question about kind of what I've changed my kind of view on is, you know, I've changed my view on how, you know, I didn't think I was so lucky, but now I've changed my view to realize actually I'm tremendously lucky. So no, actually that's not really very fair. I've always thought I was lucky because I've always really loved my job, and there's loads of people out there that hate their jobs. So I always thought that I was very lucky doing what I'm doing, but I didn't realize how lucky I was in terms of actual race, to be where I am today. So, you know, it's kind of like, how lucky. Anyway, you can kind of de-jumble what I meant by that, but yeah. So I do feel tremendously lucky, but and it's the kind of. And it's just, you know, highlighting kind of how, you know, how there's such complete kind of, you know, an unjust kind of structure in place at the moment, and has been for many, many years. And I think, may it change. So so just to leave it on that rather buzzkilly note, but I feel an important one, and it just makes me mad. Anyway, this could be a whole kind of thing just on that. So
yes.
let's not do that.
Let's try to bring the buzz back.
Okay, let's do that. Yes.
What are the absurd or stupid things that you do? And something not related to alcohol or...
Well, in that case, lovely talking to you. Okay, stupid things.
Do you have any crazy, weird routine? Maybe you do at work, or...
Oof,
when people are like always like, "Hey, Mike, like, what the fuck are you doing?" They're like, "Hey, it's me."
No, I do. Well, no, okay, none of that. Things, routine-wise, I mean, I'd like to. I mean, I've got tons of like things, like kind of OCD type things. So there's too many to list there. I like things to be done in a certain way. I like to have my dishwasher set up in a certain way that nobody else can understand.
Please explain. Let's talk about your dishwasher.
Well, for example, so in my dishwasher, right? So if I have, oh my God, I can't believe that I'm talking about this. So all the plates should be ordered in terms of size, right? In terms of diameter, right, or circumference. So the big plates should start on the far left, and then they get progressively smaller as you go in. If you have a big plate, then a small plate, then a big plate, then a small plate, then a big plate, then a small plate, right? Or a bowl, or a spatula, it's kind of like you're stopping water from hitting all the surfaces that it needs to hit. If you haven't put a glass in, and the glass is just rattling around, and it's not actually been kind of pushed into like where you got like a thing like that. If it's not been pushed in properly, then it's just going to wibble about, and it's not going to wash properly. So it needs to be rigid, so the water can circulate properly and clean the thing properly. So anyway, so that's the kind of dishwasher thing, but it never gets sorted out properly in my house. Ever gets sorted out properly. So I always end up, oh my God, and they're always going, oh, who cares, blah 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 blah. Anyway, so that makes me mad. Then it's just things like, putting the top on the tooth. I mean, turning off lights. All this kind of stuff, but I don't think those things are crazy either. That's the thing. You're asking me to say about things that are unusual or crazy or different, but I don't feel that they are unusual, crazy, or different. I find that other people think they are,
right.
But I don't think they are. I think they're absolutely spot on. And if you don't think they're spot on, there's something wrong with you. So that's where I come from. Is that I've got a ton of these things where I kind of like, you know what? I want to use my towel. Please don't use my towel. But this is like a crazy thing. It's like, hey, no, towels are free for all. It's like, no, I want to use my towel because I don't want to be having whatever on my face that you've just used it for. But as soon as I come back into the shower room, there's my towel. It's all wet. Should be wet. Should be dry. There you go. I'm sure they'll enjoy watching this when I show them. Dad, why did you have to say everything?
How many kids do you have?
I have two. I have a 17 and a 16-year-old. I actually took him to Gamescom 2 years ago, and he was so bored out of his mind. I thought it'd be like Disney World for him, and he was just going, "Oh, the queues are too long.
Yeah.
My feet hurt." I'm just kind of going, "Oh my God, I've brought you out here to Gamescom," and that was disappointing. So anyway, I expected a lot more kind of fun and enjoyment from that one, but no, he didn't get it at all.
Does he play games?
Yes, he loves games. Yeah, he plays them all the time. I think he's playing at the moment. I think he's at the moment he's got like a big kind of co-op thing happening with Terraria. That's a bit of a favorite of his.
Why is everybody playing Terraria these days? I even installed it myself.
Did you really?
Oh yeah, I think they made like a final update, and they actually reached a point where they say no more drips, as you call it.
Really?
I think so, yeah. It's like the final thing.
What was the update called? Is it Last Resort or something?
Something with L, yeah. I don't know. Whatever.
Yeah. But anyway, so he's playing that. So he regularly plays whatever, but it's just recently he's been playing Terraria because of this update.
Is there anything I should have asked you, but I didn't?
Is there any more alcohol-based questions? Actually, so one question could just simply be, how can I work with LocalizeDirect? So you can go to our website and you can fill in a form on there for translator roles on there. I think there might be other roles on there too. Go to our website, localizedirect.com, and then you can just sign up there. You can then tell us about all the different games you like playing and tell us all the kind of things you don't like playing, so we won't give you those ones. So fill that all in and then we'll go through. If you want a beta trial for Gridley, then you can fill in a form on there too. That's it for me.
Not yet. One final thing. Yes.
Mother. No, go on.
So final words from you, Michael. If you could
Yes.
talk to the minds of everyone in the localization or gaming localization industry,
Right.
what would you tell them?
I would tell them that if you are having a Drambuie shot, make sure that the liquid doesn't go down the sides here, because when you light it, then this will go up and it won't be very nice at all. Now, I would say that localization should not be seen as this kind of pain in the ass part of the process. In many instances, you'll find that localization will dramatically not only increase sales in that territory, it could make those sales in that territory even higher than other territories that you thought were going to be the winners for you. Look at language proficiency in English language proficiency in each of those, if you're working from an English source. And then just prepare. I think too many people are just kind of going, oh, how difficult can it be? I'll send them an Excel file and then they'll send me one back. Bish, bash, bosh, won't take long. It just doesn't work like that. So to all of you out there considering going out to do localization and getting your game localized, take the time. Take the time, make sure it's prepared, speak to someone like me, speak to someone like whoever it is, obviously related to localization. Don't just speak to like your refuse collector about it. So prepare. I think that's the key here. Prepare. Don't make the same mistakes. Speak to an expert.
Thank you.
That's all right.
This was a lot of fun, Michael. Thank you again for being part of the podcast.
Always a pleasure. Please feel free to edit out all the stuff about alcohol.
Maybe not. I like it.
Right, I'm going to go and get a beer now.
Of course you are. Thanks again.
Nice
bye
one.
bye.
Cheers. Bye bye.